This is how people in Rwanda's western province start their day, attempting to save whatever they can from their ruined homes. Muddy waters from Tuesday night's landslide still flow through Rubavu district, one of the hardest hit areas. Those who managed to escape the deluge described what they experienced.
I was in bed. Suddenly, my house moved and I thought it was the wind mixed with rain. Just as I was thinking what to do, the water was gone and the walls of my house were destroyed. I was saved by a neighbor and ran with my children.
The rain was coming down heavily. Through the windows, I saw a neighbor house falling down and the old man living in it died. All of a sudden, the water and the river attacked us everywhere and the houses fell down one by one, and we fled.
Rescue crews are having a hard time getting to those most affected, blocked main roads severely hampering rescue efforts. President Paul Kagame tweeted his condolences, saying his government will do everything within its means to assist. The governor of the Western Province, where most of the deaths are being reported, says his officials have prioritized reaching damaged houses to make sure no one is trapped. Those hoping for some relief from the downpours will have to wait. The Rwanda Meteorology Agency is warning more rain is to come. Malekhabe Mutsepe, Al Jazeera.
Despair in the village of Bushushu as bodies are dragged from the mud. 200 people have been killed in flash floods and landslides in South Kivu province. Homes and livelihoods have been swept away.
After the rain, we saw the water coming with pressure and houses started to be washed away. All our houses started to fall down as a result of the water. People started to scream. We saw people being swept away and we managed to save ourselves.
Rescue workers are trying to free people trapped under the rubble in their homes. Survivors say a permanent solution is needed for regular flooding during the rain season.
At this time, we need to ask our government to find us a way to move from here because we don't have any hope to live here in Bushushu, where floods often happen and every time they cost us a lot of money and a lot of lives.
In neighboring Rwanda, 130 people were killed in flooding after heavy rain on Tuesday. And in Kasese, on Uganda's border with Rwanda, landslides killed 8 people on Wednesday. Back in South Kivu, people are sleeping in the open after floods destroyed their homes. They're hoping downpours will be less extreme for the rest of the rain season, which ends in June. Barbara Ngopa, Al Jazeera. Days after the landslide, residents of Nyamukubi village are facing the full scale of their tragedy. Deborah Kalembe's worst fears have been confirmed.
The river carried people away. My brother's wife died with all her 4 children.
So far, hundreds of bodies have been recovered after landslides and floods in South Kivu. Villagers say they can't mourn until they find the bodies of their loved ones.
A disaster has happened here. I lost my little brother, who was director of a primary school. He drowned with his 3 teachers, and I lost my grandfather. He also drowned, and my sister-in-law. She's also dead, and so far, none of their bodies have been found.
A busy community was buried in seconds. Local government says it will take longer to ramp up a rescue operation. The region is plagued with armed groups and displacement crises, which hamper efforts to fight emergencies.
And if it is necessary to evaluate the terms, human and material damage, we cannot count them. But about the recovered dead bodies we are collecting, we've got more than 203 recovered dead bodies.
Each day brings grim finds. Those who survived know some of what they've lost can't be replaced. Barbara Ngopa, Al Jazeera. Flood survivors in this village in Rubavu district sit in silence as coffins of their loved ones are lined up for a mass funeral. Kamana says he fought to save his family, but the water destroyed everything he had.
I was doing everything to rescue my wife, who was stuck by the wall after the whole house fell down because of the water from the river. The last thing my wife said to me was, "Don't abandon me," and then my wife fell into the violent water. I fled because I couldn't do anything. My family and children are all dead. I am left all alone.
Floods and landslide killed at least 130 people after heavy rain on Tuesday night. More than 5,000 homes were destroyed. Many houses are still underwater and people have nowhere to go.
It's a miracle I survived, but my son died. Our house was destroyed and the water took everything away. I climbed an avocado tree and I spotted my family and 2 children by chance the next morning. At the moment we have nothing left and we don't know how we'll live.
The government promised to bring supplies to the worst affected areas.
It is a pity for the victims we are burying, but the survivors must be helped. Many of them are still in hospital. We will take care of them and move those who remain from vulnerable places as the weather is still bad.
Rescue workers are still searching the area and expect to find more bodies buried under the mud. Barbara Angopa, Al Jazeera.
Well, still ahead on Al Jazeera, we'll tell...
Priscilla Riziki has been looking for her daughter, husband and 3 children. They were living at a ranch in Shakahola along the Kenyan coast. More than 100 bodies have been found from shallow graves in the area.
I know the survivors because I was part of the congregation. I have asked if they have seen my family, but they are not talking.
Hallelujah. A pastor named Paul Mackenzie Ndenge is in police custody, accused of luring his followers to starve themselves to death in the hope of entering heaven. According to the Red Cross, 400 people are still missing. Half of them are children. Pathologists are carrying out autopsies to determine the cause of death. Authorities here are looking for more remains. Many Kenyans are still in shock. They are asking how this incident went so long before being detected. The pastor himself is very well known by the police. He has been arrested several times. Some rights groups say they had received reports of extreme fasting in Shakahola as early as February. They accuse the police of not responding fast enough.
We didn't hear from them. So we decided to go back again and later on decided to act. Because at the Human Rights Center, we thought it was a place where these congregants are. With the fact that we were told that they were starving or they were fasting, then it wasn't a harmful place, sort of. So we decided to visit the place without the authorities. And then when we went there, some of our members were actually attacked.
Back at the ranch, the number of people who have been rescued is dwindling, while the bodies are still piling up. Riziki is still hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. Catherine Soy, Shakahola, Kilifi County.
This is the aftermath of fighting between rival ethnic groups in the district of Chirachampur. Dozens have been killed in the violence since Thursday, and many others are injured. Nia Choi Ching worked as a nurse and was treating the wounded.
After performing her duty on her way back home, she seems to encounter the mobs, and she was shot there at that moment and died.
Tension between the majority Métis and minority Kuki tribal communities has escalated since February. That's when the state government started a drive to evict some Kuki tribal people from their houses, saying they encroached on protected forests.
It's not something that starts in a spur of a moment. This is the tribals were long oppressed, like the dominant community, the Métis community, has been in various ways denying the tribal their rights under the constitution, as well as those that development funds that are entitled for the tribal.
Existing fault lines have been widened by the coup in neighboring Myanmar. Thousands of refugees sharing ethnic ties with tribal groups in Manipur have crossed over, and Métis groups are accusing Kukis of sheltering illegal immigrants.
We are protesting here not to fight with other communities. We want to live in peace. But if people want to dominate us, we will not remain silent.
The army has been deployed to calm the violence. A curfew and a shoot-to-kill order has been put in place. Barbara Angopa, Al Jazeera.
Scenes of destruction in India's northeastern Manipur state. Long-running tensions between the majority Meitei community and tribal groups has flared into violence. The unrest was triggered by a court ruling recommending that the Meitei should be labelled a scheduled tribe, which would grant special job quotas and subsidized education. Other tribal groups are opposed to this.
The tribal groups fear that this would be an uneven benefit given to a community that has otherwise enjoyed a lot of privilege and enjoyed disproportionate privileges in the state, where they dominate the legislative assembly, where they historically have been in power.
An influx of refugees after the coup in neighboring Myanmar has added to the tension.
There's been a kind of a very concerted campaign that's been carried out about tribal groups, particularly the Kukis and the Nagas, being illegal immigrants and how they're encroaching land and forming these illegal, villages. And in fact, there have been evictions as well that have been carried out.
The Indian Army has been called in to restore calm. Thousands of people have also been moved to safer locations. The state's chief minister has appealed for calm, saying the fighting has been caused by a misunderstanding.
We are having altogether 35 community since time immemorial in the state of Manipur. The incident which was taken place yesterday was due to misunderstanding and some communication gap, and now everything has been settled and will be normalized very soon.
Mobile internet has been shut down for 5 days, and the state government has issued a shoot-at-sight order to enforce a curfew. India's army says it's brought the situation under control and is continuing to work to restore normalcy. Felix Nyawara, Al Jazeera.
A few years ago, this was all farmland. Chong'an, a city of almost 2,000 square kilometers, was built from scratch in just 6 years. Dujingnan is one of tens of thousands of people whose homes and villages were demolished to make way for the project.
We were farmers for generations, but now we live in these high-rise apartments, and I'm very happy.
Authorities did not allow Al Jazeera to speak to any other residents, but were keen to showcase its state-of-the-art facilities. This is one of Chong'an's smart buses. The driverless and electric buses are undergoing trials and will eventually be free for the public to use. They can drive for up to 200 kilometers before needing to be charged. The buses have sensors that react to traffic, pedestrians and bad weather, with a detection range of almost 250 meters. Chong'an was built to ease some of the congestion in Beijing, home to more than 20 million people. Independent urban design experts liken it to an experiment, testing solutions to the problems many Chinese cities face.
Chong'an is gathering a lot of best talents from different disciplines from different parts of the country to design this new solution for the whole country.
As China's birth rate declines, Chong'an is designed to attract would-be parents.
A lot of people in major cities decide not to have children because it's just too hard for their future children to get into good schools. So Chong'an is trying to overcome problems like this. So it has been a very child-focused urban design.
For Dujingnan, whose children used to have informal lessons in their village, enrolling them in school has opened up new opportunities.
I hear many universities will move here from Beijing. I would be so happy if my children could study at these universities.
It's unclear how much the government will spend on completing Chong'an, which is supposed to have almost 3 million residents within the next 10 years. But it's likely to be one of its most costly development projects, with no expense spared on what could be the blueprint for China's future cities. Jessica Washington, Al Jazeera, Chong'an, China.
The head of the World Health Organization has...
Global food prices are coming down, but many countries are still facing acute food insecurity, with fragile and conflict-affected states particularly at risk. Also this week, the conflict in Sudan sparks a humanitarian crisis, with thousands fleeing to Chad and other neighboring countries, adding to an already alarming food crisis there. And nothing to eat. The food crisis is worsening across Africa, with millions of people affected by food insecurity. But could agriculture's transformation... Food, we all need it, we can't live without it, and when it grows scarce, our shared future is threatened. Economic crises, epidemics, conflicts, and extreme weather events can wreak havoc on global food systems, in particular when many of those shocks come at the same time. 2022 was a year of unprecedented challenges for the global food system. So is this year going to be any better? Well, global food prices fell in March this year for the 12th consecutive month, down to 20.5%. From their peak in 2022 following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says. The decline was helped mainly by an agreement to unblock Ukraine's grain exports. But the FAO, together with other international organizations, has warned that concern remains high for developing countries, which are still facing double-digit food inflation, aggravated by the depreciation of their local currencies against the US dollar and their mounting debt burden. And that's leading to rising food insecurity and undernourishment. Over 30% of food is lost or wasted each year globally. That's a striking statistic, given the large number of people going hungry around the world. Over a third of all food produced, estimated at 2.5 billion tons globally, is lost or wasted each year. 1/3 of this occurs at the food production stage. Boston Consulting Group estimates that this wasted food is worth $230 billion. Well, this year is yet another one of extreme jeopardy for those struggling to feed their families, with more than 900,000 people around the world fighting to survive in famine-like conditions. This is 10 times more than 5 years ago, and that's an alarmingly rapid increase. The scale of the current global hunger and malnutrition crisis is growing bigger and bigger, with 345 million people projected to be food insecure in 2023 alone. And that's more than double the number of 2020, a staggering rise of 200 million people compared to pre-COVID-19 pandemic levels. But why is the world hungrier than ever? The United Nations World Food Programme says that a deadly combination of factors lies behind it. Conflict. It is still the biggest driver of hunger, with 70% of the world's hungry living in areas afflicted by war and violence. Conflicts in Ukraine and Sudan are further proof of how conflict feeds hunger. The climate crisis is another one of the leading causes of the steep rise in global hunger. Climate shocks destroy lives, crops and livelihoods, and undermine people's ability to feed themselves. Global fertilizer prices have climbed even faster than food prices, threatening to turn food affordability into a food availability crisis, with the production of maize, rice, soybean and wheat all falling in 2022. International aid agencies' operating costs are also at an all-time high. The World Food Programme's monthly operating costs are $73 million, above their 2019 average, a staggering 44% rise. The extra now spent on operating costs would have previously fed 4 million people for a month. Joining us now from Rome is Marco Sanchez. Marco is an economist and deputy director of the Agri-Food Economics Division at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the FAO. Marco, good to have you with us. Globally, food prices have begun to fall from their peak of early 2022, and yet in some places, food prices remain stubbornly high. What's going on?
The problem is what is going on at the domestic level within the countries. And there are several explanations as to why countries are still seeing an increase in food prices. There is an asymmetry in price transmissions, which means that domestic prices will always divert from the world prices for a while, and always permanently, because there are policy distortions that increase domestic prices, and that explains somehow what is going on. And these policy distortions refer to border measures, trade policies, export restrictions, policies to support farmers or consumers, depending on who is suffering the most, etc. The other aspect is that many developing countries are experiencing exchange rate depreciation. The currencies have been depreciating, and that implies a major impact on the import bill. I mean, food is costing much more for those countries who are experiencing exchange rate appreciation. So domestically, the food prices they are facing are increasing. And at the same time, to finalize this point, there is still very, very, very strong demand for food. So the consumer, is seeing some sort of recovery in the pockets, and they want to demand more food. Right. And that demand for food increases prices domestically.
Right. But if people can't afford to eat, are you satisfied with the international community's response to this? I mean, in 2022, the crisis was barely averted. What happens when the next food shock comes along? How much impact is climate change going to have on people's food insecurity?
That's a big question, right? Now, let me before answering your question, stress one point here. Even before the pandemic, and even before the war in Ukraine, we were showing numbers that, for example, in 2020 only, about 3.1 billion people in the world were not affording to eat healthy. Now, the response, I am myself, quite pleased with having seen the Global Crisis Response Group of the UN being formed. And this group is helping decision makers to mobilize, solutions and development strategies to face the intersectional crisis between food, energy, and finance. And at the same time, many organizations are acting with innovations on how we move around this crisis.
So what's your outlook for the rest of the year, Margaret? I mean, are food prices in these areas where they remain stubbornly high going to start to come down, or will, because of the pressures that you talked about, are people still going to be unable to afford to eat this time next year?
Yeah, I mean, the problem of affordability will remain for a while, even if prices continue to decline, because there are structural issues that affect agri-food systems' delivery of lower costly, nutritious foods that make up healthy diets. However, in terms of how the price may evolve, our thinking is that, world food prices will continue stable and may actually decline somehow. Depending on, of course, the market fundamentals, the developments in very key markets like energy, for example, and obviously what happens to weather. When you see, for example, El Niño looming, then you start worrying about what could happen, how the different stakeholders in the agri-food system will react to these things. But we think that world food prices will remain quite stable, if not declining. What happens at the domestic level is the problem. Because here we are no longer talking only about food economics, but we're talking about macroeconomics. We're talking about mounting debts. We're talking about pressures on balance of payments, and therefore what is going on with exchange rate depreciation in countries that are particularly net food importers, who are seeing their import bills going up. So, that is why agri-food systems today, embrace not only the food systems actors, but we really have to work with all the international institutions that also deal with these macroeconomic aspects in the countries that are going under this stress.
Marco, it's been really good to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Counting the Cost.
You are most welcome.
Besides droughts, floods and disease outbreaks, conflict is one of the main drivers of food insecurity in the world. The one unfolding in Sudan is no different. Hundreds of people have been killed while thousands of others have had to flee to neighbouring countries, and that's adding to an already rampant food insecurity crisis there. The fighting has exacerbated an already difficult humanitarian situation inside Sudan, with over 11 million people barely meeting the minimum food requirements. While the UN World Food Programme has warned that the conflict could disrupt food shipments for more than 400,000 displaced people in neighbouring countries, and any delay delivering food will make it hard to get long-term supplies in place in time for the 5-month rainy season that is due to begin next month. Well, the United Nations says that more than 100,000 people have fled Sudan since the fighting broke out on April 15th. Al Jazeera's Ahmed Idris reports now from Gungur, near the Chad-Sudan border, where thousands of refugees from the Darfur region have been arriving.
They keep coming any way they can. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says an average of 100 people are registered here every day. All of them from Darfur, fleeing attacks from ethnic militias. Suleiman Ibrahim Abdallah just arrived with his family at this informal camp of 4,000. Not minding that even residents of the capital aren't faring much better. All he cares about now is how and where his family finds food and shelter. Blind and helpless, Juma Kathir Suleiman arrived 5 days ago with his large family, hoping also to find food, shelter, and some peace. So far, he says, he's found none.
We have had no food and no clean water since we arrived here 5 days ago.
The elders at Gungur camp may be preoccupied with safety and welfare of the family. But for the young ones, any time is amusement time. From Tendalti to Gungur and other border communities, the mass migration to Chad is fueled by violence and threats of it from ethnic militias and rebel groups. While some refugees want to go back home as soon as security improves, some say they plan to make their move to Chad permanent.